Hello, fight fans, fight history fans, the nine, you name it. Very, very special show here today, as you could essentially expect, because we have a very, very special guest, especially in the world of boxing history, as he's one of the foremost minds that is helping to keep all things boxing history related alive, and we certainly appreciate him for that. And that's none other than the man himself, the author, historian, Connecticut Boxing Hall of Famer. So many accolades, I can't really go down the list. It would take forever, but the one and only Mark Allen Baker. How's it going there, Mark?
Very good, Joshua. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, happy to have you on as always. It's a good thing just being able to chat with you, just to hear some of your thoughts, etc. The mind of Mark Allen Baker in the world of boxing, because you highlight some of these figures from the past that were at the top of their game, some of the most popular people, not only in the sport but nationally and even globally. And then, as we know, as time passes, some get kind of lost in the wind a bit with so much stuff out there. And we're now in this technological age that has allowed us to actually start to relive and really cherish some of these great figures. And that is certainly the case in an individual by the name of Jack Dillon. So that's your latest there, Mark. I wanted to get an understanding of why Jack Dillon. What kind of led you to him?
It's a good question. Years ago, I was involved, many people know, with the International Boxing Hall of Fame. When it first started, we were downstairs and we were building folders of all the fighters. And it was very interesting because obviously some folders are monstrous, like Jack Dempsey or like Muhammad Ali. And then there were some folders, we opened them up and there was nothing at all. Back then, a couple names stick in my mind. One was Charlie Burley, who in the middle, and who at that time, pre-internet, there was nothing on him. The International Boxing Hall of Fame had nothing. And that was the case with so many, not just the pioneers, but some of the more obscure Hall of Famers, let's just say. But a name that crept up and kept creeping up was Jack Dillon. And as a Dempsey lover, and I am indeed a Dempsey fan, it just kept on coming up. Listen to his management, say, Jackie's just like you. That's the best way to compare him. And so knowing that, as the years went by, and I started in my mind going through all those files that the International Boxing Hall of Fame had, I started picking names and picking them off. And it started with Battling Nelson. And there's a fighter who had an autobiography in 1908, but disappeared off the radar screen, and nobody had any more information on him. There was just this little autobiography tucked in his folder. So I kept going, as you know, with many other names. Not the case in the biography I did in Willie Pep. Obviously, there's quite a bit on Willie, but certainly the case, and Canzoneri for that matter. But when I had an opportunity to do something on Jack Dillon, I took it to McFarland, where I have been writing for a number of years, because they're such an excellent participant in the boxing history market. And they liked it. And being Dempsey fans as well, recognized immediately who Jack Dillon was. And I also liked the fact that once I got the okay, that it was McFarland that I went with, because I wanted an academic publisher is much different than a mass media publisher. So as you know by my books, I'm detailed. I'm extremely detailed. And I'm not going to, as expected from McFarland, I'm going to cover somebody like Jack Dillon, who is a no decision era fighter. I'm going to cover all 254 of his fights. And that goes without saying. And sometimes it gets hard to work your way through, but you're more than welcome to skip pages. But I have to do that. You can't get a full picture unless you have the information. So I go through it all. And yes, there's times when the writing style gets a little heavy, a little prosaic, no question about it. But that's the nature of the beast. And if you're going to read my work, and pay the money for it, and you're going to want all the information you desire. And boxing fans these days, like baseball fans, are very, very well educated. And, and they're not going to spend $20, $30 for a bunch of hyperbole from writers with little information, with no source notes to back up any of this. So obviously it worked well going with McFarland. The other thing too I like about McFarland is they allow me to really delve into multiple sources, which I like a lot. So if I mention things like weight, a fighter's weight, not only do I go by in-person accounts, I go to other sources like BoxRec. Now, I've been criticized by some, but I don't embellish weights unless somebody else has embellished weights as part of what they were doing in the past. So I stay away from that and stick with just really good, strong sources. The other thing that I like is being able to venture off and do so many different comparisons and hope that the reader who reads this understands that when I'm saying Jack was before Jack Dillon was Jack Dempsey before Dempsey, it's like every generation goes back and says, well, who was the old Muhammad Ali? Is there ever going to be another Mike Tyson? Who's the next Mike Tyson? Who's the next Sonny Liston? Was Sandy Sadler unique, or was there somebody before Sandy? So that's the point I'm trying to get is Dillon was a stepping stone for Jack Dempsey, but it does bring up a good solid comparison. So I wrote some facts down. Jack Dillon was only 5'7". He was a middleweight and light heavyweight champion, but he was only 5'7". Now Jack Dempsey was 6'1". The other thing is Dempsey's reach was an inch to his advantage. But when you look at Jack Dillon fought three times as many fights as Jack Dempsey, and he won nearly 3 times as many as Jack Dempsey, 2.8 to be exact. Now Jack had 53 knockouts, and Jack Dempsey had 53 knockouts. Jack Dillon had 65, but Jack Dempsey's knockout percentage was higher. So I think that's why. Let's face it, knockout percentage is what fight fans live for, I think. Certainly in the heavyweight division. But then the other argument that comes back every time I mention the two together is, Dillon, who's Dillon fighting anyway? He's fighting a bunch of tomato cans, a bunch of scrubs, things that people that nobody recognized. Well, if you want the facts, they fought 5 of the same fighters, Dempsey and Dillon. They both fought Billy Miskey. They both fought Gunboat Smith, Dan Flynn, Fireman Jim Flynn, and Battling Levinsky. So you've got some carryover there. Now, Dempsey started his career in 1914, unlike Dillon, who started in 1908. So Dillon was hitting his pinnacle around 1916. That was his pinnacle, in my opinion, based on his record and based on what I've read and all the information I put in the book. And where you think Dempsey hit his, that's up to you. But Dillon fought George Tipp 12 times, Hall of Famer Frank Kloss 4 times, Billy Miskey 5 times, and the Great Harry Greb twice. Okay. They both lost, and this brings up another thing. Well, did they lose to the same people? Well, they both lost to a fighter named Willie Meehan, who may go down in history as a man just for that fact alone. Dillon also fought Al McCoy 3 times, which was impressive. But here's a neat note that I wanted to prepare for this and start out our conversation was I took all this information. Okay, my book is in a lot of the AI resources, which I'm fine with. I have no problem with that. So I decided, okay, well, let's talk Dillon and Dempsey. If they fought each other, what would happen? What would be the result? So I started typing it into all these AI resources. So let me read you one of them. It's possible that Jack Dillon could have given Jack Dempsey a tough fight due to his technical boxing skills, but it's uncertain whether he could have won. Dillon's defensive abilities and boxing IQ might have allowed him to evade some of Dempsey's powerful blows, but Dempsey's overall power and aggression were significant advantages. Now that reads like a tough call. I mean, who I'd put money on. Now it would depend on time frames, right? Because obviously, fighting Dillon in 1916, I wouldn't go near him with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
And I don't blame Willard. And Willard at the time was under a circus contract, but I don't blame Willard for saying, there's no way I'm going to fight this guy. He fought Frank Moran, and of course, Dillon, just tanked Frank Moran. So it's very interesting, really.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was lucky enough to delve into Dillon, and made a great project after going from Johnny Kilbane, which was my previous biography, to somebody like Jack Dillon. And there was nothing. I've talked to so many historians that have called me and said, thanks for putting something together on this guy. We knew nothing about him. Nothing.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a little bit of ways I wanted to kick this off. This kind of kicks it off and puts it in a little perspective as to why Jack Dillon.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that there, Mark. Again, we're here with Mark Allen Baker speaking on his new book, Jack Dillon, a biography of boxing's giant killer. And once you go through that book, you'll understand how he got the name Giant Killer for sure there. So we appreciate everyone being here, 86 Boxing. So thank you for all those that are here watching live, those that will be watching the replay. Cheers, Dan, Melissa. We thank you for being in here at the moment. Thank you for sure. And such great points you brought up there, Mark. A couple of those we can certainly touch on some of those things. I think that Dempsey and Dillon comparison I think that's a fair comparison, just giving the trajectory of each. Now, like you said, that 1916 version of Dillon, if Dempsey had gone in with him, I think that would have been a lot of problems for Jack Dempsey, certainly at that particular time. Yeah. And Dillon, like you mentioned, was on top of his game. And it's interesting that, of course, we have two Jacks there, but that being said, we know that Dillon's name, of course, is Ernest Price, Ernest Coulter Price. That's his full name there. He got that moniker, Jack Dillon, that came about. I believe it was like someone else was using it, or
no. Let me add a little something to that. I'll tell you a little background on him. It was a tough life for the Dillon boys. He had two older brothers, Chester Price, who was 4 years older than Ernest, and Ernest Coulter Price, which it's Coulter, not Cutler. Like if you go to Wikipedia, you go to all these other sources, it's Ernest Cutler. Obviously, maybe somebody thought the person was saying, he thought he said Cutler instead of Coulter. But if you look at all his legal documents, his mortgages, his draft card, his marriage license, it's Coulter. It's Coulter Price. But his older brother, Chester Price, died in the ring. Died in a boxing ring, okay? And so the boys, the two middle ones, Russell Price, ended up being Tommy Dillon. And Jack took the name Jack Dillon, because Ernest Price, in his opinion, didn't sound like a boxing name. And not only that, but the boys wanted to hide from their mother the fact that they were boxing, especially after their older brother died. At that time, I mean, Jack lost his dad at a very young age. I think he was 6. And it was just after the birth of Jack's younger brother, Paul. And Paul didn't box, but Paul was very, very, very close to Ernest as the years went by. So he loved being with his brothers. And near the end, he was with his brothers. Russell ended up in Florida with Jack's mom. And Jack's mom and the Price boys had a tough life, with the mother having lost her husband and having young kids, took in boarders at the house. And the kids were, honestly speaking, unjurisdicted. The kids ran rampant, basically, the two middle boys. But they used the name. Jack's name came from, Jack Dillon came from he worked in a stable at the time. And there was a horse called Sidney Lou Dillon. So that's where that came from. So Russell says, okay, well, I'll go with Tommy Dillon if you're going to be Jack Dillon. only to find out that Tommy Dillon was a referee in town and a well-known businessman in Indianapolis. Now, they're an Indianapolis family. Jack was born in Frankfort, Indiana, outside of Indianapolis, and then they moved closer to Indianapolis, which is interesting. Indianapolis at the time wasn't a supermarket for boxers, that's for sure. But they did have a couple people though. They had some good clubs, some good club boxing. They had some good bootleg boxing. Not at all like the circuit in New York that Lou Ambers participated in, but they did have a good circuit of bootleg boxing, and Jack Dillon did participate in bootleg boxing. I covered a couple of the bouts of the bootlegs in the book, so you can refer to those. And Jack had some mentors too. You go into every market, and everybody had them. And this reminded me of Lou Ambers a little bit because Ambers was a bootleg boxer, and there were mentors. And when you talked Indiana boxing at the turn of the century, the name that came up was a gentleman by the name of Ray Bronson. Bronson was an excellent fighter, and he had stardom written all over him until Jack Dillon surfaced. And the Price Boys, it didn't take long for them to get a reputation in Indianapolis. It was unbelievable, really, how quick that they rose right up to the top.
Oh yeah, it's like an early rival there. They're on a kind of similar trajectory right there. But yeah, Brunson, very very good fighter there. Who his name is known by some, but certainly, at that particular time, a lot of people saw in him that star-making ability as well.
And as Jack Dillon started disposing of Indiana fighters, and that's what he was doing. Tommy was boxing too. Tommy Dillon. I was going to put Tommy's record in the appendix of this book, but I didn't. So I have that. Maybe in a future edition, I'll tuck it in there. Or if any of your readers have questions on Tommy Dillon, I do have his record. I could always email that to them if they needed it. But in the back where I include Jack's record, I asterisk those fights where Tommy appeared on the same card. And they did. And they shared information. So a gentleman by the name of Pat Lark, if Tommy fought Pat and then Jack fought Pat, then they would share information on that. So Tommy helped Jack a little, from that perspective. And that worked out well, obviously. And Jack had guys he looked up to that were beyond imagination for him. But I get questioned a lot. Well, who did he look up to? Well, if you look at Jack Dillon's style, it was a combination of battling Nelson and Ad Wolgass. I mean, he butted heads with his. He went right after. I mean, he came out of the corner as a fighter here in Connecticut by the name of Bat Battolino. And Bat used to come out of the corner like he was on fire and come in and just rip into his opponents. And Dillon did the same thing. He would come flying out of the corner, and you could expect a heart shot, a shot right below the heart. That he aimed constantly, right in the middle of the chest, and you knew you were fighting Jack Dillon.
Oh yes, and those are some great comparisons there. Of course, I know you've done something on battling Nelson, battling Battolino, underrated fighter right there. Who he doesn't get as much mention as he probably should. Right there, he is a very underrated fighter, as you mentioned there, and I think that this being Dillon, sort of battling Nelson. When they came on, I think it was the right time as well as we were transitioning and starting to get more into that era of film. And I think that's what benefited Jack Dempsey there later on in terms of when he dispatched of Willard. And that was shown in theaters or these closed circuit locations there in the aftermath and things. And they helped to build him up to be a star. And not only that, with, say, for instance, with Dempsey and such, if you look at some of the champions of the past, I would say like from Willard and on back, when they actually got the title, they didn't really defend it much. And there was a little bit of that with Dempsey, but it was more so there towards the tail end. But yeah, they didn't defend it a lot. And I know that's one of the big criticisms for Jess Willard as well, who, of course, is a counterpart that kind of crossed and mixed there with Dillon and Dempsey, and we know that what that win did for Dempsey as far as what he was able to do to Willard, and what that would have done for Jack Dillon had he had the chance to fight him as well.
Good point. Very good point. And the other thing too is Jack Dillon was the reason there hasn't been a lot of books because there's not a lot of information. It's very tough to figure out. Jack Dillon was a very, very private person. He said very little, especially early in his career. When he would go on the road, the beat writers would go nuts. They'd be clamoring on him and yelling at him, "Can't you just give me something? I mean, this is my job, is to get information from you." But Jack just said said nothing. He didn't even, when he went to his camp, he never even commented to his sparring partners. That's how secretive he was. Now, why was he secretive? Well, a couple of reasons. One, were there ghosts in the closet, so to speak? Yeah, you'll start seeing some of those surface as you read the material. Dillon he went so quick in the Indianapolis market that he ticked off just about everybody. He upset the writers. He wouldn't talk to them. He got very arrogant. I mean, he disposed of managers like tissue paper. I mean, like tissues. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like if you read things like BoxRec, they put up Sam Merbarger as his only manager. He had over 24 managers in his career early. Merbarger was by far the best. Now, he was a former professional wrestler, and he had a gym, he had a lot of contacts in the Indianapolis area. So that was a good fit for Dillon. But Dillon ticked him off that they had a big spat. Merbarger quit for a while, and then finally Dillon got him back, and Merbarger was pushing him, man, you got to get out of Indiana. I mean, are you serious with this thing? I mean, you got what? Chicago and New York, and primarily New York. If you want to be big time, you got to go where the action is. It's not in Indiana, okay? Unfortunately at the time. Not for someone the caliber of Jack Dillon.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a great point you brought up there, because I was going to ask about that. I did see that he did go through a number of managers, and it was at a time when he was fighting a lot. He was still fighting a lot. He was just going through managers. And from your perspective in diving into them, or into him and just his career, do you think that sort of disposing of managers ultimately was a hindrance to him becoming a little bit bigger than what he could have been?
There's two things. One is staying in the Indiana market, and I'm not being hard on Indiana. I've got a lot of my family's out in Indiana, and I love Indiana a lot. I've done books on racing, but it's the Indiana market for a talent like Dillon, and two, the inconsistency of management. Because of his attitude toward him, he could care less. I mean, he was such a cocky. His attitude was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. You read some of the book, I didn't. And as we get more and more into his career, and it ended on a sad note, as you've read through. But I mean, the press didn't like him. He had to do some favors for the police to keep the police on his side, and then he ended up. I mean, when Prohibition hit, I mean, all hell broke loose with the life of Jack Dillon, and he became a bootlegger, and it cost him his reputation in Indiana so bad that he had to move to Florida. And then when all of a sudden things blew up in Florida, he moved to Hialeah, Dade County, outside of Miami, where the track is, the horse track. And Jack Dillon was a gambler. Okay, he was a gambler, and he was a gambler, a womanizer, and a drinker. Okay, and sounds like Willie used to say, right? You know, those are the three that killed Willie, right? He said, and my wives were the good housekeepers because they always kept the house, right? So anyway, but those things hurt Jack Dillon for sure, and it was a sad way to end. I mean, you write these things, and do you get moved by these people? Oh, I was devastated.
Yeah.
I didn't want to put all this in. I don't want to put on that, you know, he was arrested. He did time in jail. He was arrested again. The list was endless, but I have to do what I have to do. I call it the way it is. And I felt bad, but people tried to help him. But again, during that period that Jack Dillon fought, Wouldn't listen to his managers about the three things I just mentioned. And then the other thing, he would, he had outside of Indiana was a place called Terrace Beach, which is where my three kids live, believe it or not, and a quick drive. And he had a cottage up there, and God, I mean, the cottage was like a den of iniquity, and he kept that, and all sorts of stories came out of that. So it was unbelievable. But it's a sad story. I think he could have been so much better. I think he was a little early in his career. Had he come out maybe right at the same time Dempsey came out, it would have been interesting. It would have been really interesting. And he didn't draw the color line like Dempsey. Dempsey, Team Dempsey, not Jack Dempsey. Team Dempsey, Kern and Rickard at the time. But Dillon would have fought. He had Langford, and I never would have fought Langford. Dillon, I would have said, "Are you nuts?" Right. But he would have fought him because he was that type of guy. He wasn't scared of anybody. He was just a cocky kid. And boiled down to.
No, that is definitely the case there, Mark. And with that in mind, of course, I was thinking about the fact, of course, that as he was coming up, he was generally around middleweight, but he'd be outweighed. Most times he'd be in there outweighed. I know they were listing around 158. We've seen certain weight classes go through these different changes over time in terms of what they competed at for what was considered the championship fights and things of that nature, but just generally what they competed at weight-wise. Because I know lightweight used to be 133, so on and so forth. You had some of these changes with middleweight. Dillon, often a guy who was like in these 150s, he'd be going up with the guys who are bigger than him, things of that nature. And as you mentioned there, him wanting to fight anyone, I know in reading the book as well, there was mention of him wanting to even try to get in there with Jack Johnson. And it seemed to be on that particular trajectory because it came at that time of sort of that great white hope period. Now, of course, Dillon, when Jack got the title, of course, Dillon was still very early in his career, but there was some overlap there where, hey, that was potentially a possibility just based on some of the sort of readings and the clippings and what they were saying about Dempsey at that particular period, or Dillon rather at that particular period.
Very true. And I pinpoint, I'm glad you brought it up. I pinpoint that in the book when he beat Gunboat Smith. When he beat Gunboat Smith at the time had the white heavyweight championship in his pocket. Now he destroyed Gunboat Smith. So, that whole era, which I hate, I write about, but I detest it. I don't think Dillon was serious, at that point, he wanted the heavyweight title. He wanted Johnson. Okay. It's nice that he beat Gunboat Smith, but he could care less about Gunboat Smith. He beat him, but so what? It's just a stepping stone to him. It wasn't, Dillon wants the white heavyweight championship. Nonsense. He wants all of it. Lock, stock, and barrel, and he'll fight anyone he has to. That's what it boiled down to. But I did bring that up in the book. But he took the middleweight championship from Leo Houck in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Leo was a great fighter. If you ever get a chance, he's an obscure guy. McFarlane has my publisher of the Dillon book has a book on Leo Houck. I'll put a pitch in for that.
Okay.
I don't believe any fighter came out of Lancaster County, but Leo did.
Leo Florian Houck, my Leo. That's what I call him, my Leo. But heck of a fighter right there. Another one with a ton of fights as well. Because I know, he had a lot of no decision contests as well. So very good fighter there. And I do want to dive in him a bit more. I know some people on the channel will know him. His name has popped up there in that trajectory as well. And just think of that's the caliber of individuals that Dillon was fighting, which is insane when you really think about it.
Took the middleweight championship from Houck, and then he turned around and lost it to Frank Klaus, and then then started pushing toward the bigger championship, the light heavyweight championship. He fought Levinsky multiple times. And the other thing that really bothers me is, the record books say, well, when he lost to Levinsky the last time and, quote unquote, a title pass, if you read everything, and I mean,
Yeah.
I read everything, as you can tell by just looking at the books. This is only the books. This is only the information got into print.
Right.
My books are double the size, and it gets reduced down to what you see. So you can imagine. Like the Madison Square Garden book, I had to laugh. I delivered 250,000 words for that book, and they said cut it to 100,000. Take two wheels off your car.
Right.
Anyway, it was interesting. So he grabbed the middleweight. He didn't want the middleweight. He just at first he just wanted money to support his gym and his family. And then he realized how good he was. He got cocky, made some changes in his life. He did get to New York. He had just gotten married and has moved his family out of Indianapolis over to Muncie, and because his wife had relatives there. And, he went into New York, and there's some strange things that happen. He finds himself a lot of the times in hot springs, which is kind of a known place where it's not good for your concentration. Let's put it that way. At the time, and a lot of the guys did. It ended up being. Remember, for a while when we were. I used to remember the fighters all went to Miami for the off season. Well, all the fighters used to go to hot springs, and I'm trying to figure this out for years. Then I started figuring it out, and it's great for gambling and drinking and girls and everything else that can take you away from why you're there.
Yeah. The funny thing about that, Mark, is I'm from Arkansas originally, and I kept seeing these Hot Springs, Arkansas references, and I was like, "Hold up, is this the same place that is in Arkansas that I've been to? I don't remember this place."
Yeah, it's very true. Now, well, the baseball had some spring training there. I know.
Oh yeah.
Jack Dillon met Babe Ruth there.
Yeah. Which is, I thought, I was like, what the heck? In Hot Springs, Arkansas? You serious?
I wonder if Dave's wife was with him. I'm not too sure. But he fought Levinsky. The Levinsky fight, when supposedly the title passed, if it was a title fight, you got me on that one, because it didn't sell like a title fight. It didn't have interest like a title fight. Nobody showed up like a title fight. Whether it changed hands or not, I don't know. If you want to argue with, the previous ring record books or box record or Hank's old records, and go ahead and knock yourself out. But to me, it didn't seem like a title pass. But at that time, quite frankly, Dillon could care less about what. Levinsky is a great story. I wish there was more on Levinsky. He changed his name, and he fought Dillon twice under Barney Williams, I think, which was his alien. But until he got the right management, like Dillon has, and convinced him to be proud of your Jewish heritage, then Levinsky took off, and Levinsky was one tough fighter, very, very tough fighter, and getting through him was more than a speed bump. I'll put it that way.
And I'm glad you put that in there as well, Mark. I know they fought multiple times, but just thinking about that, knowing where Levinsky finished in another guy, 200 plus fights there, just thinking about in terms of just rapid pace, things of that nature. It's certainly one of the best that we've seen, one of the best light heavyweights in history in general. And you think about the fact that Dillon was going in with Levinsky, you noted it, like George chipped 10 times or something of that nature, that a lot of these individuals that were like world champions or would go on to be world champions, things of that nature, he was fighting them multiple times. And that's one of the things that stood out for me there, Mark. It was like early in his career, because, it's a sharp contrast to today, where oftentimes, fighters get, they say, marinated as they kind of just go through the process to learn. But oftentimes back then, you're kind of just thrown to the gauntlet early. But just the amount of fights that he had with these top caliber fighters who would go on to be some of the best the sport has seen, a lot of that was happening very early in his career, which I thought was like a standout thing for me.
Yeah, in Indiana, word got around fast in Indiana. Real fast. No, he couldn't get sparring partners. He could, and he tried moving around Indiana, trying to stay close to home. That didn't work either. They put ads in. I have copies of ads, him looking for sparring partners in various newspapers. there's as you read through the books, there's some tremendous stories about Jack Dillon
Oh, yeah.
going through. There's some funny ones, especially near the end, near the end of his life. It was sad, the
Yes.
thing that got sad, not only the alcohol, the demon alcohol that just entered his life like there was no tomorrow, without programs like they have now. And I stated that very clearly. And but when all of a sudden he finds, there's different laws in Florida that can impact residents. And when he couldn't take care of himself, there's a law that says you can be institutionalized.
Oh, yeah.
And back then it's a sanitarium. Nowadays it's not. It's assisted living situations, things like that. But he went to the Florida, the main sanitarium up on the Florida Georgia line. I put pictures. Pictures of the institution in there, so you could see the conditions he lived in, and you can imagine at that time, especially. I mean, think of when the Depression hit these places. I mean, how could they keep up places like this? And he ends up buried in a potter's field. At some point, I'm going to drive up there and try to find his grave, because I get down to Florida a lot, and I'm going to try to find it where he's buried. And because it's heartbreaking. It's just so heartbreaking when we lose these guys, and what they have to go through, at the end of their career. Some of them, it just hurts.
Oh, yes. It does. It does there, Mark. And that's one of the things that, and I was going to bring it up too. Going to talk on that kind of sad ending for Dillon, not just for the outside of the ring stuff, but even competing. Just when a fighter just loses that edge, and they were at one point just seemingly unbeatable, then to be traveling and competing with fighters that, hey, back in their prime or whatever, they would have dispatched them fairly easy. And you could see that a fighter, and that's what I got, that Dillon, he wanted it so bad to just get himself back up to that sort of title status, get him back in the running for a major fight, get him back in the running for a Dempsey fight, but he just didn't have it physically. I know he was having issues with his legs, things of that nature, just to where he could do it,
Yeah, he tore ligaments in his legs. The alcohol definitely played a part in it, which wasn't good. But I go back to this, and I love the readers to give me some feedback on this, because I think it's true. But I really feel the two battles with Greb, the first one, Dillon couldn't believe that he got beat as bad as he did, and the second one was horrible. And I think it did such psychological damage, Joshua, that this guy said, he ended up taking off up to the woods. They couldn't find him for months. Finally found him hunting in Canada, I think it was. But it did damage to him. The legs were never the same. The psychological damage was always there. And then you started getting the dementia things, the dementia. And that started, working its way into the picture. And the guy was fighting a lot of battles. It's sad. He did try to clean his act up at one point while he was living in Florida. And they actually got him to come back to Indianapolis, where he was remembered. He was a hero. And they tried to get him back. And he got himself into shape a little bit, cleaned up, and made a respectable showing. But, he wasn't the same. Nobody knew he was the same. He was living on memories. People are living on memories at that point. But to show you the level of adulation, if you go through BoxRec, go through newspapers, history, more people took his name than I think any other fighter. There was young Jack Dillon, old Jack Dillon. There was so many Jack Dillons. I think there was like 20 at one point, that they were getting confused. And so everyone used his name, which was unbelievable. And it got so bad. I actually talked to historians. This was back in the times I was working with the Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota. I was talking to Hank Kaplan about it. It got so bad. Some of the historians believed that there was a guy that went to Washington, D.C., was actually Jack Dillon. There was an article in the newspaper and a picture and everything. And it was a fake guy. The whole story was fake, but it sold. It still turned. It's funny. Here's how things carry on. The myths in boxing that carry on. there's some books that still mention the fact, well, Jack was in Washington, D.C., and he did this, lit his car on fire and blah, 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 blah. That was a fake Jack Dillon. And the people who realized that contacted the newspaper at the time and told them it was fake, but the retraction was about this big on the bottom of the classified ads, So, I mean, again, it hurts his reputation. And it just wasn't right. It was just a sad story, really. And I think he regretted later on not opening his mouth more and talking to the sports writers. And that one issue of not speaking to the writers, I mean, that'll chase after you. I mean, we've got some boxers here in Connecticut that weren't good with the press, and it's haunted them. And it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
I agree there. Right. Yeah. I wish he would have been a little bit more out there. And yeah, I think one of the highest forms of flattery in the sport is when you have these other boxers take on your name, which we've seen in the cases of some of the best the sport has seen and some of the more popular. I think that just shows the level of impact that they had, that you're willing to take on that fighter's namesake and keep it alive and try to even expand upon it even more, things of that nature. So I think that's one of the highest forms of flattery just in the sport in general.
And the other thing why I like doing people like Jack Dillon is other people's surface. I remember they often ask him his hardest puncher, and it was a guy by the name of Eddie McGordy. Oh yeah. And, I love going back and finding these names, these people that were so interesting. The Ray Bronsons, right? The George Chips. You mentioned George Chip. These people that I think still need more attention given to them. And that's why I like doing what I do. Believe me. I mean, I've been questioned so many times about why do I write about these obscure individuals? Why? And I've told this 1,000 times. There'll end up being 50,000 books at least on Muhammad Ali, and he deserves every one. He deserves every one. I'm not taking anything away from him. He's a great fighter, no question. But some of these guys, like the Louis Ambers, Jack Dillons, Battling Nelsons, they could use a book. It brings a part of our history back. Okay, it's boring to some extent with the kids, the new fans of boxing, but you got to know your history in order to appreciate the present. You got to understand the past.
Yeah,
and we all know that, and you can see that with the heavyweight champions going through and who they identified with and who they liked, and everybody's had them. Everybody's had them. Muhammad Ali would. Love Sugar Ray Robinson, and why not? And you work your way back, and it's unbelievable. And Mike Tyson liked a lot of the older fighters. Of course, Mike's a historian, but he's a good example of someone who appreciated history and took advantage of it. And whether I know Cuss kicked him with that, but it worked. It worked with that.
But yeah, and he took on some of those traits. I know he's a big fan of Dempsey, and that's kind of coming in with the black trunks with the fade and just menacing. That look. I know some of that was Dempsey-esque. One would say
very much, and at the time, and I'll digress a little bit from Jack Dillon, but we had I owned a bar, a part owner of a bar in Syracuse, New York, and every time Mike Tyson fought, there was standing room only in Central New York. I mean, Mike Tyson was the most exciting thing that happened in boxing during my generation. And actually, I should buy Mike dinner for that. If I see him, I should buy him dinner just to thank him for all that closed circuit boxing he gave us. It was an excellent time to watch him. But he did appreciate history, and I like that a lot. And I'm proud to keep on, getting chances with McFarland to write about like Jack Dillon, because he's a great story. Battling Nelson's a great story.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if they ever make it, I don't know why they don't make a movie out of Battling Nelson. It would have been the best choice going. Rags to riches to rags. He dines at the White House with Theodore Roosevelt and ends up dumpster diving for his meals. I mean, unbelievable. And I feel
crazy story.
I mean, maybe a story like Jack Dillon, I get involved with boxing here in Connecticut. We do a lot of work in the amateur circuit, as you know. A lot of guys here, Johnny Callis and our friend Joe Cusano. You see these younger kids, and sometimes I'll hand them a book on Jack Dillon. And I was telling John Scully, I gave him John a book on Jack Dillon. I said, if the kids read this and realize that they have alternatives as they develop a boxing career, it'll teach them, stay away from the booze, stay away from distractions, focus in on what you need to become a champion. And John's perfect for it because he's a great trainer and a great influence like Johnny Callis here in Hartford.
Oh yes. I know that name rings bells. Yeah, good trainer for sure. Yeah, definitely. I know of him. I've seen some of his fighters doing their thing. So yeah, that's good stuff. And one of the things you had mentioned, Eddie McGordy, in phenomenal fighter there. I actually got introduced to Eddie McGordy through Les Darcy, who you mentioned as well. Of course, the Maitland Wonder.
Yeah.
And I bring that up because Mark, of course, Stanley Ketchel, he was the middleweight champion when he died in 1910. And that kind of left it out there for grabs, I guess you could say, that claim to being the middleweight champion. And of course, we know Dillon would have just as good a claim as any, probably sooner than when he actually beat Hawk, as you mentioned. But it was just a log jam, it seemed, of a bunch of big names there, different people. I think Billy Pappy was probably the second guy to kind of get recognized for it. But that being said, in all actuality, Dillon, hey, he might have been that top guy right there in that period. And in theory, he probably should have had that title a bit earlier.
No, absolutely. You bring up a good point, and I was going to bring it up, and I skipped over it. I shouldn't have. But also in that mix, you'd have George Chip, Gus Christie, who was handled by Merbarger for a while. Georges Capendier, another name that would not be ignored. Mike Gibbons. We talked about Frank Kloss, but Harry Lewis, Frank Mantell. We talked about McGordy and Dave and Jeff Smith. But these are all guys that were in the mix because of Ketchel's death. Ketchel's death, everybody wanted it. Papke was, okay, quote, logical, but I bring up all the goods and bads about Papke and why he should or shouldn't have been the era. And I bring that up in the book. But that was a logjam, and I recognize that, and I brought that up in the book too, that it was a logjam.
Oh, yes. Yeah, certainly. And yeah, such a great name, Jeff Smith. I want to do a video on him just to kind of dive him, the Bayonne Globetrotter. I think very underrated, what I call a common name fighter. So you probably search Jeff Smith, you're going to get a million Jeff Smiths pop up. But this is a standout and certainly should be highlighted more. But I was thinking about that logjam, and I honestly, in doing some things on Les Darcy, such an underrated fighter there, and it's unfortunate what happened with him, and of course dying at 21. But that was potentially going to happen there, Dillon versus Darcy. But I saw there were also some other, I guess, promoters. It seemed like more than one promoter was throwing things out there like this matchup is going to happen. This matchup is going to happen with Darcy, and ultimately we know he never actually got to fight because he died. So that was a very interesting piece as well.
Yeah, that was a good. I put that in because it was interesting, and I worked it into the pictures because of the dynamics of promoters, the dynamics of different teams. Darcy came over everything, all of the. When you looked at the newspapers, that's all they talked about is Darcy's coming over, who's going to fight him, who's going to get the call, and then all the politics came into play, and then people calling Darcy a draft dodger. I mean, he came over on a freighter. A freight ship, if I'm not mistaken, a cargo ship, right?
Yeah.
And Darcy was a fantastic boxer, okay? Yeah. And then no question about it. But the politics entered, and then of course the tragic death of Les Darcy. It's terrible, and I did bring it up. I put Darcy's picture in the book because Dillon was very interested, and Team Dillon worked hard to get Darcy. They went to court. They spent thousands of dollars fighting to try to get the shot at Darcy, and it was working to their advantage. It was, but it never happened. But thank you for bringing that up. I should have brought it up earlier, but maybe I was, not Darcy's a name not a lot of people know. It's, somebody comes over from like Carpentier, right? Carpentier and Dempsey, who would have heard of him? Basically, something like that. I don't mean that. That's a little drastic statement, but there were a lot of good European fighters at the time that didn't get the recognition they deserve.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's interesting. The whole market was in a fascinating era to write about. The era and the guys who emerged and people like Dillon who just, how close they got to Dempsey, right. And, they would have crossed. They fought 5 of the same guys, but who knows if they would have fought? I don't know. There's no way that Dempsey would touch him in 1960. But once, again, I didn't try to compare Dillon to Dempsey, but I was because I love Dempsey so much. I was fascinated with Dillon the way I'm fascinated with other possibilities that Dempsey could have fought. So, including Frank Wills.
Yeah. And Harry Wills. Harry Wills. Yeah. And Mark, another thing right around that time frame, and you mentioned him in there. You mentioned Fred Fulton. Now he and Dillon didn't fight, but what they had in common is I know both of them were aiming at getting that shot with Willard. And I do think that both of these individuals, Dillon and Fulton, would have both beat Willard at that particular time had they got that opportunity, but it didn't happen. And then I was wondering, because as I was reading through the book, and I know you brought Fulton up, I was wondering if they would actually compete. It looks like that didn't happen. That being said, they were both like there and on top of their game at that particular time. Now, Fulton would have had the size, reach, and all of that stuff on Dillon, but hey, it would have been tough for Dillon, or tough for Fulton to deal with a guy like Dillon, and he had struggles with this being Fulton, a guy like Billy Misk as well. Yeah. So that goes to show you sometimes that size didn't matter as much as one may think when you had a very good top level smaller fighter going in against some of these bigger fighters who were good, but just a lot to deal with. And so I just brought that up because I know Fulton, he was on that trajectory as well. They both fought Carl Morris. I know you mentioned Carl Morris, big guy right there. And it's crazy just to think about Dillon, like as you mentioned, 5'7", and him not being like a huge guy, just going up against guys like that. But that shows you, truly a giant slayer in that sense.
Very much. I put a chart in the book which kind of lays that out. I would say if you look it over, it's mostly he could care less about a 20-pound advantage. Dillon didn't even see a 20-pound advantage. He just didn't see anything beyond that. Either. He would have, who is it, Andre Anderson? I can't think of the guy.
Yeah,
who was
the bigger, 70 pounds or something of that nature.
Yeah, Dillon, this is where it gets fun. I put a weight in there, but in the chart, all the weights line up to Box Rack and the other sources. So that's where all that came from. I'm not making that stuff up. But Dillon just these numbers kept on getting higher and higher as Dillon got older. So it's like anything, the fish gets bigger, right, as the time passes. So Dillon exaggerated. There's no question he would use that if he could, and he used it later too a lot. When he did do a few interviews late in his life, that number got higher and higher. And I can whip anybody, give him 50 pounds, 70 pounds, I can whip him. So he was funny at that point. He probably. Maybe in his head he could have, but he did do these guys in when he was fighting, and I list those in the book. I had to put a chart like that because I'm saying he's a giant killer. Well, if you're a giant killer, show me some giants that he killed, and that's where. And it's a pretty good list.
Yeah,
and the Flynn boys weren't. That's not a speed bump. They weren't related, but nevertheless, they were good, great fighters. You mentioned Miski or Misk, however you want to pronounce it. He was hell to get through. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, as another fighter, another fighter lost too soon, and another fighter who some of these guys you have to be crazy with. And grab and with Billy there. I mean, it's unbelievable. But a good thing too with, as you know, as is become customary with my books, I put all the fights, whether they were scheduled, postponed. There's no gaps. So like all my books, you can go back. It's not the ring record book where all of a sudden you jump from 1 year to 2 years down the line. You know what happened. And this is, and I bring up fights that were never identified before, as I did with Kilbane, as I did with Kilbane on some facts that nobody knew. And it brings up all the, and I should bring this up sometime at Canastota, maybe this weekend, right, when the induction thing, and do it up one of the fireside chats outside that they have, the ringside chats, and talk about the lack of consistency. I mean, Kilbane, I remember the story I told you. Kilbane takes a fight with a fighter. Some other guy starts the fight and some other guy ends the fight. Now, how does that work? How does that get in your official Boxing Hall of Fame records? How do fights with 2-minute rounds get called? How do fights that don't have regulation gloves? Should we be asterisking some of this or not? It's unbelievable. And I try to bring those things up because they're great stories. They're great. No question about it. But it was an interesting book to do. I'm glad I did it. It's like I'm glad I did it. You bring up, Carl Morris. You get the name out of the past, and I think Bob Armstrong was one of his sparring partners. I remember Bob colored heavyweight championship, and Bob was a tough guy. All those guys. Denver Ed Martin, all those. Guys. That's tough stuff when you start getting into that book. But he, I give Fireman Jim Flynn a lot of credit. He didn't balk at Dillon, and he fought everybody in his path too. He was another Dillon type. Hearn, Charlie Weiner, another overlooked fighter.
The Newark Adonis.
Yeah, the Adonis himself. I thought that was Tommy Logren, but I guess it's the Adonis is Weiner before Logren. But there's always a look good. There's always a guy who looks good, even if he gets ripped apart in the ring. This is so much fun writing about these guys. It's just you bring them to life. It sounds like an Evanescence song, but you bring them to life and make them real. And the funny thing of it is these books, they do very well. I must get a letter a week about Lou Ambers. Everybody loves it. I get so many the Lou Ambers books. It's just like I grew up, and it's so nice that they're still out there. You can still get a copy of them. You can still go to Lou Ambers Field in Herkimer. You can even get the book in Herkimer. It's nice that these guys don't disappear through the cracks.
I think that's a good thing there. I still need to read that Lou Ambers. I have that from you there, Mark. That's what I still need to read right there. Lou Ambers, heck of a fighter there for sure.
I'll get on your case about that after.
Then we'll have to come on and talk about it.
But there's a good chance I'll have a couple other books out by that time.
Good to go. And another name I wanted to mention there, Mark, it is a name I have always seen, but he fought Dillon a lot of times. George K.O. Brown, kind of one of those underrated guys there who I just always see his name there in the mix of fighting someone, and I haven't done a deep dive or anything on him myself, or I just have mentioned him in some videos, but man, he was in there with Dillon a ton of times as well. Crazy.
When Dillon first beat him, he called that the turning point in his career. That's how important he thought K.O. Brown was. And I put the pictures of Brown in the book, and he's probably the last guy on earth you'd ever think would be a fighter when you look at his career. But he was a tremendous, tremendous competitor. And it's I love these names. I love them in baseball too when they surface. And, And more, thankfully, Joshua, these names are, I told you about Leo, that my
Yep.
publisher has a book on him. There's a book about Henry Armstrong. Now, Henry Armstrong's not
Mm-hmm.
obscure, but he's somebody that should have more written about him, in my opinion. And but I like to see more. Thank God, more and more of these are surfacing, and I'd like to continue doing it and bringing some of these guys to life, really, so people can compare them. Dillon shouldn't be lost. He's not a fighter who should be lost in boxing history. I mean, some guys can say, "Oh, yeah, no, he was there, and he was a big name," you know. And I when I end the book, and I won't read it because I want people to read the ending of the book. Instead of getting a premier historian to write about Jack Dillon, there was an old letter to the editor. I think it was to Dorgan about Jack Dillon, and I loved the letter. And I said it really sums up what Jack Dillon was like back then and what he meant to people. And I loved it. I ended the book that way. And sometimes you just find the perfect thing. And this guy is just writing a letter to the editor like you or I would write about somebody. And but it deserves to. It says it all. I couldn't have said it better at the time. There was also a good ring announcement made about Jack Dillon. It was at a Dempsey fight. It might have been Dempsey Carpenter. It might have been that fight where the announcer read a wonderful introduction about Jack Dillon, and I loved it when I heard it. And I lead off one of the chapters on that, and it makes the perfect lead in. You know, it's like, oh my gosh! I mean, this is an announcer at a major fight. Jack stand up, and he announces like this, and I love that. I mean, boxing has always recognized some of the past participants, and I love that about that. You know, about ring announcements.
You know, and Mark, and just thinking about that, which is very ironic. It's like this decline, and even when you mention that announcement, because I recall that, and I would say, he was still in his late 20s when this kind of decline, I guess you could say, started to come about. So you think about that and seeing some of the articles, and they were pretty out there with their thoughts and feelings in terms of the journalists from that time. But I know you mentioned a number of them who were noting that, oh, he was done. He was basically washed up, saying that, and he's like 28 years old, basically, you know, and I saw that. So when we talk about that decline, this is like going from the late 20s to early 30s. And it was like such a drastic difference or a drastic decline in a sense right there. And that was a sad part of it too there. And I know we kind of had briefly mentioned this the other day, but I was wondering, like, just maybe that pace of in which he was fighting there early on at a younger age, and then just who he was going up against. I wonder if that kind of was one of the main catalysts for taking the toll as well, because you're talking like 200, 250 fights or more, you know, and it is insane that before even hitting 30, you know, he's pretty much on the decline.
Absolutely. And how quick boxing. I forget what one of the books I was reading said it right, but boxing buries their participants quicker than any other sport. And it seems so true. Well, he's done. I mean, and Dillon, in all honesty, was pretty done at that point. But they do bury it a little bit prematurely, I would say, some of the participants, and it's a shame. I mean, obviously, we just lost George Foreman. George Foreman is a perfect example and used a lot.
Oh yeah.
But we bury him too soon. And maybe they retire too soon. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But we hate to see our heroes fight and end their careers like that. It's horrible. I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. You know, I mean, these are my heroes. I mean, we all cried when Ali lost at the end. You know, I mean, I don't want to see Muhammad Ali like that. I mean, he's always the greatest. I mean, you know, it's bad, but we bury them so fast when they have a bad fight. Sometimes true, sometimes not so much. You know, valid or invalid. I think it's too quick. But hard to say. But this is a good book. I'm glad it fills a gap for me. I needed to do more I love these because I think I learn more than anybody because I read all these. I mean, I know these sports sections up and down over the years, but I always learn something and names surface and I love it. I really do. And being that I've got family in Indiana, I'm very proud to do it from that perspective. And it gives me a chance. Like next time I head out, I might head up to Terrace Beach and drop off copies. There's a yacht club up there. What I should do is just drop off a bunch of Jack Dillon books to the yacht club that's up on White River. I go by White River a lot when I'm out there. It's a strange river. It meanders. It's got everything. It's not smooth, but the kids kayak and they go bananas there during the summertime. It's been kind of a tradition up that way. But
I bet. Yeah.
I love Indiana I'm so proud of it because so many different places my kids will say, oh, geez, Broad Ripple. I've been to Broad Ripple, blah, blah, blah. Write a book that the kids can at least identify with the location, if not all the fighters. Anyway.
Yeah, I've never been there. It has solid history, though, as you mentioned there. And of course, Jack Dillon being the Hoosier Bearcat there. I mean, yeah, certainly a standout just in general, just thinking about Indiana there for sure. And one of these amazing stories. I'm glad you actually did the book there, Mark, as mentioned. And I will mention, hey, you scan the QR code in the middle of the screen. You can go directly to where the book is, make that purchase. I did want to throw that out there. But, Dillon, very, very intriguing, very interesting story. One of the things I was going to mention, Mark, was there at the tail end. Of course, he had a lot of legal troubles. He seemed, despite the fact that he didn't get that Broadway level of stardom in terms of having that kind of major fight of that nature, that was that Broadway, that iconic one with all the big lights and all that stuff. As a matter of fact, from what I know, I don't think there's any real footage of him actually. In terms of you have that many fights, 250 plus fights, and there's no footage. It's always a bummer we don't get any of that. But that being said, I know just from reading your book, he was making some pretty solid money at different points. And at the end, he seemed to be in a decent state there. Then, of course, the depression came. But then, of course, he had a lot of the legal things with the booze and all of that. I'm sure that played into some of it. And then, of course, just that particular time frame there around the Great Depression. I know that sapped a lot of fighters and things of that nature of their investments and such. But also, I guess you could say that there was probably some money that was left on the table for Dillon that potentially he could have had, if it weren't for this management type situation in him not being able to get that true Broadway marquee fight,
Absolutely. That's a great observation and so true because a good management and location. I mean, you've got to fight in venues and those venues got to be accessible and you've got to have promoters that can get you on cards that are meaningful and you got to have managers that know how to develop you and put some revenue potential behind your name. And he left a ton on the table. I'm glad he mentioned that. It's sad. I mean, and again, some of his own behavior could have been modified and helped. And he didn't talk to the press. Surprisingly, he didn't have more problems. I mean, for a while, the Indiana police tolerated him. They would go raid these camps or raid him or arrest him and stuff. And they give him warnings. I didn't even cover the warnings in the book.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even cover some of this stuff. Okay. There was a situation, and this arose too, and I read there's a situation where one of the mayors wanted him to go crack some heads on his behalf of the mayor didn't like. I mean, some of this surfaced. Dillon got in trouble. Dillon got in trouble for being with underage women and for doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. But it's a shame because he had value in his name. He became a legend so quickly in Indiana, started making a legend nationally, but never got the big fight, never got the accolades he deserved. And it's a shame. But I'm glad I know about him now. I mean, I put Dempsey in better perspective now,
Yes.
knowing Jack Dillon, okay, and knowing that he was a giant killer. Yeah, Andre Anderson, the guy who was 70 pounds heavier, was not a monumental name to destroy at that weight, but nevertheless, he was a giant killer, and I'm so glad I framed his career and made it accessible to others. And I'm glad people appreciate it. So I've gotten a lot of nice notes, people saying, thanks. We really didn't know anything about this guy. And all of a sudden he surfaces and we know a ton about him now that we never knew before. So I'm proud of that. I am very, very much and thankful for a publisher who knows what that means. And that's McFarlane.
Oh yeah, that shout out to McFarlane in that regard, because yes, you're right. Just being able to get that green light on these types of stories, it's I think it's definitely meaningful and needed here in the sport of boxing. And man, yeah, it's amazing that an individual like Jack Dillon, when you look at his resume and who he was in with and just kind of his trajectory and all, that he could slip under the radar. But we've seen that oftentimes with a lot of our historic greats from the past in this sport that kind of slipped under the radar a bit. And some of that is, I'd imagine, timing, and then for individuals such as him, just that recognition, because you can legitimately say like, hey, at one point, he might have been the best middleweight, light heavyweight, and even heavyweight in the world, but you don't necessarily see that through like a title or anything of that nature. And of course, that has allowed some things to slip through the radar. And he's one of those individuals, but just truly one of the great fighters that the sport has seen. And yeah, I think this helps to push out that Dillon story, that sort of myth of Jack Dillon. You get that through this book. And at the top, I know you were mentioning, Mark, that you cover all of the fights. And I've shared this with you, that I feel that that's the way you get to know and understand a fighter like Dillon. You can't just skim through and look at some of the just popular names you may know or whatnot, but you really have to understand him as a fighter. You have to see where he started, how it ended, and his peak, kind of that trajectory where he got to. I feel like that's the best way to understand a fighter like Jack Dillon, because otherwise you may just throw him in the shuffle with just any old fighter when he's far from that.
No, that's great. That's a great analysis, especially like we mentioned, the no decision fighters. You've got to mention it. It's such a big part of their career. You've got to mention it. You got to let it surface. You got to draw out how did he win? Did he go the distance? Who is this guy? Did it make sense at the time? And that's what I try to do with. I can't put a book out like this and not have every fight and not confirm every fight. And this goes back. We look at the International Boxing Hall of Fame, which I've played parts of in the past too. But we need, the benefit of the internet and has really helped us, and some of these publishers bring back some of that history. Bring it back, make it alive again, and make it real. I mean, and they know this too. They're going to have to go back and update all the records at some point. Maybe myself and some of the other writers that are writing about the history of boxing can help them through books like this, so they don't have to spend all their time verifying through 3 sources whether this actually existed or not. But that's what I try to do. That's what's expected of me. And when you buy the book, you're going to get it all, and you're going to get detail, but that's what I want to do. And that's the people who the fight fans, again, don't get the credit they deserve for picking up a copy of something like Jack Dillon and reading it, because they're mature enough to understand it and learn from it. And that's why I like writing in the market. I have so many people come up and thank me, and even relatives, past fighters. And the funny thing, so I write about Nelson and Canzonieri and Attell, but I've heard from all the families, of all these fighters. I mean, I get letters from one of Attell's kids, great grandkid or great cousin or something. I mean, I hear from these people are still out there. These people are still relevant in families' lives. So, maybe this will bring to light to some of the Price family that they had the great Jack Dillon, in their lineage. I mean, it's wonderful to bring that. I sent a copy. I always send copies of my books to the Historical Society. Send it to the Indiana Historical Society so that they would have it. And Indiana has had some very good boxers. Tony Zale, right? Indiana, right? That comes to mind immediately. The great Tony Zale. But they should know their sports history, including boxing. They shouldn't. Again, it's not baseball, it's not football, it's just boxing. That's the way they figure sometimes. But no, it's an important part of history. It's important. Jack Dillon was important in Indianapolis. Sam Merbarger was important in Indianapolis. So was a lot of the other people that I mentioned in the book from Indiana. And they can't be overlooked.
Oh yes, no doubt about it there. Yeah, and hey, stars of their time as well. You look at some of the biggest just sports athletes in history. Some of them are boxers, and it's at that iconic level, starting from John L. Sullivan. You name it, keep going down. Jack Dempsey, so on and so forth. So I think that is very much important. And this is a great deed here, Mark, in this book that you've done for Jack Dillon, a biography of boxing's giant killer. Real quick, I know you mentioned that Nat Fleischer viewed him as, what is it, the third greatest light heavyweight of all time?
Yeah, Nat and Fleischer. Now, and the great thing too, real quick, is go back and listen to some of these people who saw both people fight. And there are newspaper clippings and things of people who saw Dillon fight and saw Dempsey. And that's interesting. And like I said, read the article at the end of the book from the letter to the editor saying, hey, you haven't seen anybody who's seen Jack Dillon.
Oh, yes. I think that's big time right there. You think about that. I feel like heavyweight, yeah. So, well, all the divisions, they have the marquee names, but like heavyweights, we've had some of the just greatest fighters in history who competed in that division. I mean, and to be ranked that highly amongst them from a guy like Nat Fleischer, I think that does speak volumes right there, most certainly, because this was a rich era with fighters as well, and that's one of the things that I think your book highlights as well. When you see all the names that Dillon was in there with, you just realize how rich of an era it was, despite the fact that for some we don't have all of the footage and things to go along with it, but we do have the accounts, the coverage, etc., round by round, you name it, journalists being there, people on the ground, and you can just see it was a very rich era of competition right there. And I think that just adds to it even more, just knowing that, or knowing who he was competing with and being able to stand out from that bunch,
That's good. It's another good thing a book like this does is the committee, the boxing writers who are not the boxing historians necessarily, but the boxing writers who put people on the ballot. Books like this maybe can surface some names that belong on the ballot in various categories. And I think that's part of the historians, and there's a lot of us who are writing about the history of boxing and are not beat writers that are digging out the old papers and finding these names. Maybe these books will bring some of those to light, because it means so much to the families to have these names surface on the ballot and get a shot at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. But they slip into the cracks, and we have a couple here in Hartford, and we know one that slipped. Okay, and I'll say his name, Marlon Starling, that needs to be brought out and get on the ballot. And that's what we got to do. We got to get these great names on the ballot, and we got to give them, at least get them that far, and then let the writers make the judgment. I'm not arguing with their judgment. They brought some good people up, but we've got more to bring up.
Oh, yes. Most certainly there. Yeah. Hopefully they can rectify that. I got some time to rectify that as soon as possible, because you're right. It should definitely be on there. And it's good. Yeah. And I think this book, along with some of your others, and then the others who are writing just these historic books, does help to shed some light on different things of that nature, because there are a lot a lot of competitors from those eras that get missed. And hey, the boxing world definitely needs to know about them and what they were able to accomplish. Um, Real quick here, Mark, I wanted to ask just in general, because I know you've touched from all different eras. Do you have a particular era that you're more fond of, that, or that piques your interest a bit more when you're going through and thinking about these different fighters and who to actually write on?
Well, each one always brings up something.
Mhm.
I guess more it does. If anything, it brings up names that I mean. I wrote the Nelson book, and then Ad Wolgast comes up. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, we need more on Ad. And then I
Mhm.
go through the different eras. I mean, Willie Pep, obviously the 50s.
Mhm.
I love the 50s era of boxing. But then you have like Canzonieri and the
Mhm.
40s and 50s. You've got the tough part of writing about that part is all the dishonesty that was involved, all the
Oh yeah.
underground stuff that when I wrote Canzonieri, I didn't want to cover it. Did I know that? Yeah, I knew it. Obviously, you don't fight in Madison Square Garden more than anybody else if you don't have contacts. But
Yeah.
if Tony Canzonieri doesn't have a biography, write first that, okay? Then attack him on all the other sources if you want to do that. It's just not
Yeah.
fair. It's not fair to tear a guy apart who's never had a biography, and because as soon as you get the
Mhm.
underworld involved in these books, then people look at him differently
Yeah.
and put him in a different category, and it's just not my cup of tea. But each one opens up new possibilities for me,
Mhm.
my interest in different areas, and I like that. I like the no decision era. I think there's like
Oh
you said,
yeah.
a lot of guys have slipped through the cracks, and I mean I like it all, like the 90s. I
Mhm.
mean, I had a close, I had a venue that showed all these closed circuit. These are all fights I all had. I had
Oh,
them
that's awesome.
in Central New York, and so I know
Mhm.
what that was like, and that's a fascinating era for me. And of course, over the years, I've met everybody, and and I've spent the whole day with Willie Pep,
Oh
so
yeah. Yeah.
what that's like, and I've been involved with boxing from so many different angles, and now of course, being here in Connecticut, been on the board here, and have tried to do what I can here to bring some of the older names to light. And there's a lot still. We have a huge ballot to get into our hall, and it's tough to get in. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of great New England talent. Let me tell you.
Oh yes.
We brought, as you've seen firsthand when you were at the induction, some of this talent is just
Mhm.
incredible. And the other thing, the peripheral people too, and I'm so glad. Okay, we got new people coming into the hall in the recent years. We got judges, we got
Oh yeah.
cornermen, more
Mhm.
Far Eastern fighters. There's so much we're starting to bring in, and I'm so happy
Oh yes.
that they're bringing these people in. And we've got a lot of Hall of Fame judges here in Connecticut, two of
Oh
the
yeah.
very best, and you should see the guys on the way up. They're just as good,
Mhm.
and they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. And I'm going to fight for them too,
Okay.
the recognition they deserve.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's awesome right there. And yeah, I think the Connecticut Boxing Hall of Fame is great. In going in to the Mohegan Sun and seeing the actual section where you have the plaques and things of that nature, I think that is just rewarding in itself right there. When you start to see some of those names and you just realize this is Connecticut. This is what Connecticut has done for the sport of boxing there. It's amazing.
Yeah, just Connecticut. Walk along those walls, and you see names that you're like, oh my God. You start looking these people up and say, how come they're not at least on the ballot, the
All
International
right.
Boxing Hall of Fame ballot? And we've got a huge, like I said, we have a huge ballot. It's hard to get inducted. I try to bring out some of the old timers, and we did the last couple of years. We brought in quite a few of them, so that's good. But I'm happy that I have a chance to do Jack Dillon and bring his influence to newer faces, to bring his influence into the people that are inducting our candidates for the International Boxing Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah.
And I can't wait. Every year they've picked some good names. We need more good names. There's more faces. Okay, and this year's a great year. I'm excited about female boxing. Okay.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited. We got some really
Mhm.
good fighters. We got one of the very best training here in Connecticut. Well, I won't say, and
Yeah.
but we've got some great female fighters. They deserve more recognition. You know, I've had these conversations I've been on podcasts with Chrissy Martin.
Oh yeah.
Had these conversations with them, and more and more. This year was a wonderful year for female boxing. So many great names got in their Hall of Fame. You know, photographers, trainers, just great. I'm so happy. I mean, this is for these people to get recognized. I don't want them overlooked. A
Oh
lot
yeah.
of
Yeah.
30, 40, 50 years in the sport, but because they're not on, HBO After Dark or something, then nobody knows who they are. I see them.
Yeah.
Fights, you see the same faces all the time, or in libraries in my case, or at Canastota for the past 30 some years. But it's fun. It's really fun. I can't thank the readers enough. I'm so grateful for so many good people that recognize my work and say nice things about it. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. No, we appreciate you, Mark. You know, that's a daunting task there in terms of pulling all of this stuff together and then getting it in a structured manner the way you do to be able to tell that story of a fighter. And as you mentioned, going through that process of what's in, what's out, and just how to truly highlight them in a way that gives a full picture and understanding of not only the fighter but the individual as well. And I think you do as great a job as anyone in relation to that. And I think these stories will stand the test of time. So at the end of the day, their names will be out there, and you will have orchestrated this sort of pathway for those in the future to understand these great fighters. So that right there is just a thing in itself that is appreciated, for the work that you do there, Mark.
Thank you, Joshua, so much. It means a lot to me. It really does. And I'm proud to do this show with you, and expect a few more books down the road.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was gonna mention. I'm sure there's something up your sleeve there, Mark. Just thinking about when we done our last interview, so we'll definitely be looking forward to that. But I do thank you for, of course, taking the time to join me here. Spend an hour and a half just talking boxing history and the great Jack Dillon. And as mentioned, folks, here in the middle of the screen, you can scan the QR code. You can go get the book there. It will take you to Amazon. And of course, always, if you want to get in contact with Mark, www.readmarkallenbaker.com. Drop by there as well, of course, Mark. So it's always great just to be able to interact and have these discussions with you on some of these great historic fighters, because I learned a ton going through the book. Just learned so much as well, and I absolutely appreciate the fact that you come on to the channel to share this information.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you very much, and thank all your viewers too. I hear from them as well, and what you're doing is very, very important, and people like me appreciate it.
Sounds good. So, folks, with that, thank you for being here, and stay tuned. Stay tuned for sure, because this isn't the end. I'm sure there's more coming, and we appreciate all of you. Be sure to go check out Jack Dillon, a biography of boxing's giant killer, one of the greatest fighters in the history of fighting there. And major shout out and thanks again to Mark Allen Baker. And check out some of his other books as well. So you visit the website, you'll see some of the other stuff. Johnny Kilbane, excellent story. I mean, Abe Attell, Willie Pep, you name it. He has you covered. So be sure to do that. And be sure to check back in with us. So thank you all, and certainly have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.